was told before I came up here that I didn't need to be wearing a name tag just to carry my coffee cup around like this everywhere I go, because it's got my name on it. My name is Richie Goad, and I'm the minister of discipleship here at Catalyst Church, and I'm excited about this morning because we are getting to start a new sermon series together entitled Light of the World. Entitled Light of the World. I think I might have to go back a couple of slides here. All right. Yes, we are in this new sermon series entitled Light of the World, and today is actually what is known of as the first day of Advent. The first day of Advent. And Advent is just kind of this fancy word that is used to denote the arrival of a notable person, a notable thing, or a notable event. And for Christians all across the world, we celebrate Advent as this period of preparation, a period of preparation for the birth of Jesus Christ. Advent teaches us something about what it means to wait, being willing to wait. It shows us the beauty that is behind waiting. And ultimately, I feel that Advent shows each and every single one of us that there is something important about the topic of hope. And that's what we're going to be talking about this morning on this first day of Advent. We are going to be talking about hope. And as I was considering this topic and what hope looks like, I went back to my childhood years and thought about all the things that I hoped for then, and then kind of compared them to the things that I hope for now that I'm in my adult years. When I was younger, I hoped for many things. Maybe I hoped that I would get a good grade on that test that I didn't study a lick for. Maybe I hoped that I would be the reason that my team, the Pulaski County High School Cougars, y'all saw some pictures several weeks ago of that, but hope that my team would win the big game, that I would be the reason that we won the big game. Maybe it was hoping that my crush would begin to notice me. Then when I was in high school, things I hoped for changed a little bit. As I got into my junior and senior year, I hoped that I would get that scholarship that would take the financial burden off myself, my parents, our entire family. But as you get into your adult years, the things that you hope for change a little bit. Maybe it's not hoping to get a good grade on that test, but maybe it's hoping that you will get that promotion in your job, that promotion at work that you have worked so hard for. Maybe it's not hoping to be the reason that your team wins the big game, but maybe it's hoping for good health just so that you can play the game. And maybe it's not hope that your crush will begin to notice you, but maybe it's hoping that your son or daughter finds a godly man or woman so that they can call him their spouse. And maybe it's not hoping, maybe it's not hoping that you will get that scholarship, but maybe it's hoping that you win the Powerball, which is pretty big. All right, which leads me to some news. Guess what? I did not win the Powerball, okay? But we all hope for many things. But for some, maybe the things that we hope for are a little bit different. Maybe the things that we hope for in life are a little bit more intense. I was listening to a Christmas message the other day by Kevin Queen, and he is a pastor at Crosspoint Church right outside of Nashville, and he tells a story of an encounter that he had with a man in his church at Starbucks one day. He had some downtime, and he thought he would go across the road from the church offices just to relax and unwind, work a little bit on church stuff at Starbucks. And when he went in there, he was in line, and he had on his Crosspoint Church t-shirt, and there was a gentleman in front of him that noticed the shirt. And he said, "Hey, aren't you the pastor over at Crosspoint across the street?" And Kevin said, "Yes, that's me." And they introduced themselves. He said, "I'm Kevin." And then this other guy said, "Well, my name is Bill. And I have been going to Crosspoint for several years now. And I just want you to know how much the ministry of Crosspoint has impacted my life. And really, it's changed my life for the better. When I first started going there, I was in kind of a really, really tough space in my life. And now, 3 years later, I'm doing a lot better." And Kevin said, well, that's great. After we get our coffee, can we sit down and talk about this change in your life and what that looks like? And Bill was like, yeah, I would love that. That would be fantastic. So they sat down, and Bill started the conversation off by telling Kevin, you know, I don't think the hospitality ministry at the church is very happy with me right now. And Kevin's like, oh my goodness, what'd they do? What happened? And Bill goes, well, several years ago, our daughter, she moved out of the house, and when she moved out, something just happened between me and my wife. We weren't connecting, and our marriage began to fall apart. We sought out counseling, ways to mend things, but we just kept becoming really, really distant. Our arguments turned kind of violent and aggressive, and it ended our marriage. My daughter, when she would come back from college, she could sense things weren't right. And then when the divorce was finalized, she became very, very resentful of me particularly. When she would come in, she would go see her mom. She didn't want to have anything to do with me. So one time when she came in for a holiday, she did. She came into my apartment and saw me. And we were having a good conversation, but then things took a 180 and became really, really bad. It turned into an argument, and we were yelling at each other. She didn't like the way I had treated her mom. I didn't like that she was going to a college that was really, really expensive and putting us in a bad place financially. So I looked at my daughter in the midst of all that, and I said, you know what? If you wouldn't have been selfish and went to that expensive college, maybe your mother and I would still be married now. Ever since then, she hasn't talked to me. I tried to call her, I text her, I email her. She won't respond to anything. So, you know, I know the hospitality team at church, they want you to kind of pack into the middle to give people some room to sit, but I don't do that. Every Sunday, I sit down in a very specific place in the worship center, and I save a seat beside me on the end of the row. Several months ago, I sent my daughter a letter, a handwritten letter in the mail telling her how sorry I am for everything that happened, apologizing to her, and she never responded to that letter. However, within that letter, I put a map of the worship center in it. And I drew out every seat. I put squares where every seat was. And in one seat, I put a smiley face. And that smiley face represented where I would be sitting. And that star, I put a star on the seat next to it. And that represented a seat that I was saving for my daughter. And in that letter, I invited her to church, showing her where I would be saving her a seat every single Sunday, just hoping and praying that she would come in and that she would sit in that empty seat and that our relationship could be mended, that I would be able to hug her, that I'd be able to embrace her and reconciliation could happen. I keep that chair empty for a reason, because of the hope I have of seeing my daughter. You know, I truly feel like we are people who are naturally hardwired for hope. I feel that God made us to be optimistic by nature. I truly feel that we are people who are born optimistic. Pessimism, I really feel like that's something that is learned over time because of the bad things that can kind of come in our lives, the dark things that can happen around us. But I think that the reason that pessimism exists in the first place is because somewhere deep, deep down there is that little glimmer of hope. So this morning, as we continue on this first day of Advent, I just want to ask you, what does your empty chair look like? What is that one thing in your life that you hope for, that you long for to happen? Maybe it's hoping that things will get better at work. Maybe you're not the biggest fan of your boss right now. Maybe you're in a situation where you're not getting along real well with your coworkers and you just hope that things that things get better before you quit and leave. Maybe it's hope that things will get better at school. Okay, I see quite a few of our middle and high schoolers in here this morning, and that's awesome. But maybe you're hoping that things get better for school. I know y'all are getting ready to end the semester, right, here in a few weeks, and it gets down to crunch time, like I was, hoping that you get a good grade on that test, hoping that things just kind of subside a little bit with all the stress you may be going through, because I know what that's like. Maybe it is hoping for a restored relationship. Maybe it is a restored marriage. Maybe you're here this morning or you know of somebody who right now they're just struggling in their marriage. The conversations that are had aren't necessarily cordial at the moment, lots of disagreements, and you just hope for some sort of reconciliation. And maybe it's not in a marriage, but maybe it's hope that any relationship that you have in your life that has kind of been soured can get better. Well, here's the thing this morning. There's an important lesson that we all need to know. It's that hope is not simply rooted in a future-oriented faith. Hope isn't something that we just have in our lives so that something will happen or get better in the future. Because the reality is who we put our hope in is far greater than what we may hope for in the here and now. See, it's not bad to be hopeful for something. It's not bad at all. But our foundation must be who we first put our hope in. You know, over here, if you notice on this table, we have these candles. We have these candles, and when I was younger, we lit a candle every Sunday to represent a different characteristic of Jesus, of what Advent represents. When I say we lit it, they wouldn't let me anywhere near a lighter. When I was in Sunday school, my Sunday school teacher, she was like, "We're not letting you have the lighter." So, Miss Esther, this one's for you, all right, if you watch this, all right? So we're going to light this first candle, and this first candle, whoops, wrong candle. And I am about to burn myself. Oh my goodness gracious. There we go. So this first candle of Advent represents hope. Advent, it starts with hope. See, darkness is this sign, is this symbol for hopelessness. But light, hope comes into the darkness. Hope comes into the darkness. You know, 700 years before the birth of Jesus, there is this guy, his name is the prophet Isaiah. His name is the prophet Isaiah, and he came to people who had lost all hope, partially or to an extent, fully because of their own abandonment of God. The people of Judah, they had alienated themselves from God. They had turned their backs on him, and they were so just kind of nonchalant about their faith, just kind of going through the motions. And that's what prompted, the Lord prompted Isaiah to pronounce judgments upon these people. So you have judgment after judgment after judgment. And then in Isaiah chapter 9, he begins to make these declarations in the hope that God's chosen people would turn from the darkness and embrace the light, especially the light that was to come. And that is when the prophet Isaiah, he begins to share of the good news of Jesus in Isaiah chapter 9. And here's what we read, starting in verse 2. The people walking in the darkness have seen a great light. I want you to pay attention to that word light, okay? People walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. And then you go to verse 6, and this is where the description starts to become really, really real. We read, "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. So you have Isaiah speaking of the light that is going to be coming into the world, but several hundred years later, I want you to see what the writer John says in his gospel in chapter 1. Again, pay attention to this word, light. He says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He's talking about Jesus here. And he was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. You see, these verses, they show how Jesus is the light that breaks through the darkness, the light that provides hope. You see, the reason that Jesus' birth brought so much hope is because of how dark the world at the time really was. See, the Jews during this time period, they were controlled by the Romans, who had this very, very evil leader named Herod the Great. And Herod, he treated people very, very brutally. Here's what would happen. This is a little graphic, but what would happen is the Roman soldiers, they would come into these towns and these villages, and they would take the men. And what they would do with these men is they would tie their arms and they would tie their ankles, and they would pull the rope apart so that the skin on their back would become tight. So it would become tight. And what they would do is they put these men down, and they would take a blade, and they would carve 1 inch by 1 inch squares on their backs, and then one by one they would begin to peel the skin off their backs. And you know why they did this? Because they could. No one was going to tell them not to. They could do it. They wanted to show who was in charge. They wanted to show who had all the power. And if this wasn't bad enough, the men who were being attacked, they would escape the towns and villages, and they would go up into the cliffs, up into the caves that were surrounding them, and hide. And that was fine. Maybe they'd be safe for a little while, but who'd that leave behind? It left their wives. It left their children, their families behind, and God only knows what the Roman soldiers would go in and do to them. What would happen sometimes is the Roman soldiers, they would go in and they would take infants, they would take babies, and they'd have them crucified. And they would put them on the doors of the houses that were in the towns and villages, so that when someone went into their home, that was the first thing that they would see. And of course, when King Herod heard about all that was going on, how these men were running away and how they were hiding, he didn't like that one bit. So he had the Roman soldiers go to these cliffs and go to these caves, and they would blow smoke into them. And what that would do is these men, they couldn't breathe very well, so they would go out to catch their breath out of the caves. And once they did, the Roman soldiers would capture them, and they would put them on grappling hooks. They kill them, put them on grappling hooks, and hang them up so that other people could see this. So it was their way of saying, if you're thinking about running, think again, because this will happen to you if you do. So you had a whole nation, a whole group of people wanting for a little light of hope. And that's not to even mention the census that is going on at this time that we hear of in Scripture. And basically, a census is just this fancy way of saying, hey, let us know who you are, where you live, so that we can tax the living daylights out of you. Okay? And the census, it's a lot darker than we may originally think, because if people didn't go and sign up for the census, give them their information, go back to their hometown, they would be hunted down, and they would be killed, or they would be tortured themselves if you didn't sign up. But if you did sign up for the census, you know what that said? It basically said that you were pledging your allegiance to the Roman government. Okay? So this was the kind of world that Jesus was born into. This wasn't a world where things were peachy keen, where things were smooth, where people were getting along. It was a torturous and highly oppressive society and world. However, to me, that is where the beauty of the Christmas story lies. That's where the beauty of the Christmas story is found. Jesus, he wasn't born into a world where things were going great. Jesus was born into the mess. He got right into the messiness of our lives. He was born into the darkness so that his light could be seen, so that his light could be shown. I want to show you a picture. It's up here on the screen. This is a picture of what is known as the Herodium. And this was kind of Herod the Great's palace, this refuge that was made at his command. I remember back in 2017, we actually got to visit the Herodium. And while we were there, we were going on, I think it's the backside where you entered, and you went on this road, and it was really, really interesting. There were probably 7 or 8 middle school aged girls, and they were digging, they were chiseling in the side of this tell, which is a fancy word for man-made mountain. And they were digging into the side of it, and they were doing some excavating over there for one of their history classes that they were in. So I thought that was really, really cool for a history class. Go and dig a little bit in the Jerusalem area. But this Herodium, this palace, it's located about 10 miles south of Jerusalem. And this was actually made not just for King Herod to live in, but it's the place where he was buried as well. This was where he sought refuge. This was very, very elaborate palace. It required the reshaping of the top of this hill. What Herod did is he had a bunch of his slaves go in there, reshape, put dirt on the top of that hill so that it could be a little bit higher, so that he could see better. He had these nearby springs channeled in through a very elaborate aqueduct system for him to have running water. There was a huge pool there for his enjoyment like no one else had seen before. It contained courtyards, elaborate halls and chambers. But its elevated position was very, very important because it allowed King Herod to have a panoramic view of Bethlehem, of Jerusalem, and the Judean desert. But I want you to think about this for just a moment. Take yourself back thousands of years ago, a couple thousand years ago, to this place. Herod, he hears word, he gets word about this person that people are referring to as the King of the Jews. And what happens? Well, Herod, he becomes disturbed. He feels threatened. So he has this secret meeting. We see this in Matthew chapter 2. He has a secret meeting with these individuals that we know of as the Magi. And what he does is he sends them off to find this child so he can worship him. But we know that Herod the Great, he just wanted to have Jesus killed. But here's the thing. There is a high likelihood that secret meeting that Herod had with these Magi was right here in the Herodium. It's very, very likely that he had this meeting in this palace, this place that overlooked Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and the surrounding areas. And what's crazy to me is while he is having that meeting, Jesus had been right underneath his nose all along. But Herod, he was so focused on the darkness of the world, threatening people, the brutality of his kingdom, wanting people to know that he was in charge, that he didn't even realize that the light of the world was right there in his midst. You know, Desmond Tutu, he is this Anglican theologian, and he was once a leader in South Africa, and he once said this. He said, "Hope is being able to see that there is light despite all of the darkness." You know, the reality is that we live in a world that is just full of darkness. We live in a world in which there are societies who are under a great amount of oppression. Many of them might be experiencing it like the Romans had control back in the day. Maybe it's the darkness that you experience when you are alone with your thoughts and you just go to dark places. We talked about this several weeks ago, the topic of mental health being an elephant in the church. And I'll just tell you right now, I think some of the darkest thoughts that I've ever had in my life have been when I'm alone, when no one else has been around. Maybe it's the darkness that you or a loved one has, or a friend has experienced from abuse. The darkness experienced from abuse, whether it's physically, whether it's verbally. And we may get into these moments in our lives in which we think, where is hope? Because it doesn't seem like things are getting any better. This morning, can I tell you something? Hope is here. Hope has been here all along. And hope has a name. And his name is Jesus. So, as we begin this Advent season, working our way towards Christmas, may we be aware of the light of hope that shines in the darkness. Because here's what hope says. Hope says that tomorrow is going to be a lot better than today was. When I wake up tomorrow, it's going to be way better than it was yesterday. Because to escape hopelessness, we must embrace the hope of Jesus. Because who you put your hope in is far greater than what you may hope for.